I have an entire rant prepared.
That's hilarious. I'm like dying for that one.
Our kids are beginning to learn German using Bob the Builder.
Ah!
Or should I say Bob der Baumeister?
Sehr gut. Wunderbar.
Seriously?
I've been getting random German phrases around the house. It's kind of weird.
Wait, what?
Seriously, German? Go home, you're drunk.
Snap.
Whoa.
I must admit, Alex, you're looking very dark.
Yeah, it's because the lights are off.
I have tea, I'm happy. Do you know the only Beyonce song I know is the one that was in one of the Chipmunks films?
Is it me you're looking for?
The hills are alive with the sound of interpreting. Welcome to Troublesome Terps, a show about the things that keep interpreters up at night, apart from binge listening to podcasts, which apparently is a thing now. We're happy about that. Today we have an extra special episode, but before we even get to that, allow me to introduce my extra special co-hosts, who are always worth diarising. First off, we have the big brother of Troublesome Terps, but not in a strange 1984 surveillance kind of way, Alexander Drexel.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Diarising is an interesting word, but we're not going to get into that right now. It says I should say something mature in the script right now, but I'm not, because I actually wanted to suggest that we rename the podcast to the Brady Bunch for a reason that I'm not going to share right now.
This is going to be like part of Troublesome Terps lore. Like, why do they want to be called the Brady Bunch?
We might share it at the live event.
We might share it,
probably
but until then, you can actually let us know your theories on Twitter.
Ooh.
Yes.
And you heard him before. His laugh is unmistakable. Probably the most famous laugh in interpreting. Rounding out our troublesome triangle, we have the cheeky chappy in Lederhosen. I was about to say the cheeky man in chapstick. Alexander Gansmeyer.
I actually have nothing to say there. I'm like at a loss for words now.
I win.
Just say something.
Well, if you want me to come to the live event in my Lederhosen, please let us know on Twitter as well.
Oh.
Okay, we're going to put a Twitter poll out. Lederhosen, yeah or the 9?
Oh, there you go. Yeah or the 9. Das baby.
You really know something about content marketing, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's very true. But yeah, as Jonathan was saying, today's show is quite unique because usually we spot interesting people or hot topics and build a show around them. But today we actually have handed the reins over to you, our listeners. And you guys have sent us a few questions, and this is going to be our very first Ask Us Anything episode, or our, as I've been founding it on Twitter. Honestly, I found this, so I'm pretty happy that's a thing, especially
and
in German.
Everything on Twitter is true.
That is very true.
As we know. There is actually one thing that I found out on Twitter that is true, and that's related to the topic, the Ask Us Anything, because Corinne McKay and Yves Baudouin of the Thoughts on Translation podcast also did an Ask Us Anything, but that was not related. It was their idea.
That's true.
This was our idea. We did not coordinate this at all. But maybe at some point we'll do an Ask Us Anything together, all four of us or something.
Well, and great minds think alike, so I'm really looking forward to their episode.
That'd be
listening to it.
3 plus 2 is 5.
Did I say 4?
Yeah.
See, that's why I'm in languages and not in mathematics.
Yeah, but so we've gotten a few questions, or actually, yeah, we've gotten a few more questions, but we picked the best of them, the most important ones of them that we found we could actually possibly answer a little bit. And we're going to try to answer that today. And the emphasis is definitely on try to answer.
Trying.
Well, I did a job not so long ago at a rugby match, and in rugby you get 5 points for trying, so
Hey, A for effort, which never made any sense to me, by the way.
Yeah, because effort begins with E.
Right? I have no idea what that means. Love it, though.
This episode, can I just apologise to our listeners now? We didn't mean for this episode to have in-joke after in-joke, but that's just how it happens sometimes.
Yeah, maybe we should just move to the first question, shall we?
Thank you, Mr. Mature.
Absolutely.
Yes. The first question was submitted by someone who preferred to stay anonymous, so we'll of course respect that wish. And the question was, I'll direct the question to Alex G and Jonathan first, because the question is the following: do the interpreters with only 2 working languages ever feel bad, guilty, inferior for not having more passive languages, and how do they get over that feeling? Maybe let's start with that first bit first.
Because then the second
Jonathan?
bit is for you.
Yes.
Okay, I will start with 2 things. One, when you do business networking, you realize that being able to speak more than 1 language is a rarity in the UK. So that kind of helps. The second thing is, in the UK market, C languages are about as much use as economics is to the case for Brexit.
Hot take.
and so there's actually kind of, I might be slightly controversial with this, but in the UK market, certainly as I've experienced it, there's really no point in a C language because every conference is kind of 2-way or doing relay into your B language or whatever. So, I want to add the passive language. I actually would love to add passive German. I wonder where I can find people who speak German to practice with. I have no idea.
I don't know.
I have no idea.
But I think the thing is that I realize if I was to add German, my clients would expect it to be active German. So I don't feel inferior at all. However, if I lived in, say, Brussels or Paris or Munich, I might feel inferior, but then I can say, hey, I'm a native Brit, and that kind of gets me away with things. So it really is what you make of it and what your clients want. And if your clients are screaming at you for passive languages, well, maybe go add some. But if you've got enough clients and you're getting work, you don't really answer to any other interpreter for how many languages you have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree, but still, I feel bad, guilty, and inferior every single day, I have to say. No, but I think Jonathan is completely right, because I do think that on the freelance market, having a C language is... you can do it. I think in Germany in particular, it's really useful to have English as a C language, but anything except English is... optional, I guess, before I say something wrong and really put my foot in it. But, I'm learning Italian right now, and everybody keeps asking me, oh, you want to work with Italian? And I'm like, well, it's exactly like Jonathan was saying, like it would have to be an active Italian, and there is no way in hell that I'm ever going to get it up to an active B. So I'm just doing it for the joy of it, because I really think that an Italian C is optional.
And it's an Italian C sounds slightly Adriatic to me.
That's true. Okay, brownie points for this one.
That's really
but
good.
Since you were talking about potentially, optionally adding a C language, that leads me to a somewhat controversial question, because that would kind of open up the possibility of working from a C into a B, which in some circles is very much frowned upon. Any ideas on that?
Yeah, but I don't get why that is frowned upon. If you can work from your A into your B, why don't you work from your C into your B? Like, it never made sense to me, that whole thing.
Exactly.
So, do you guys feel like that's fine?
Well,
are we all on the same page?
There's kind of a neurological reason why they would say that, but interpreting studies doesn't know as much about interpreting as we like to tell people we know about interpreting. So the neurological reason is there is an assumption in the West, and I say Paris school, German school, that B to A will always be your best combination, and that you should always be doing most of your work into B to A, because it's assumed that because you're going from your second language into the language that's most embedded in your brain, that you'll produce better output in your A than you would in your B. Therefore, the theory goes that if B to A is better, surely C to A is much better than C to B. And there is an assumption that if a language is your B, your production is going to be very good, but it's not going to be as good as in your A.
Right. But then there's also the theory, right, that if you go from your A into your B, that you actually produce superior work, because in your A language, you understand all the nuances and the entire sense of the conversation much better than if you wanted to get it in your B. And that's why you can actually compensate for the language skills in your B through the improved understanding in your A. Yeah.
So that is the Russian school took you're better going into, the way I understand it, the Russian school traditionally took go into your B, you'll probably get better off because you understand the nuances. The West, Paris, Heidelberg, Germersheim took they go into A. And I would have to ask a neurologist, but my impression is that it's more important when you learn the language and how far you take it than it is anything else. Personally, at the moment, if I had C German and someone said, could you go German to French? I would go, probably not, but that would be for a linguistic structure reason rather than necessarily anything else.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But if someone, German to English, although, you've got the old quote about a German starts off a sentence and emerges like 5 minutes later with a verb stuck.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, Mark Twain, apparently. But still, because English has Germanic stuff in it, I would say that German to English is probably easier than German to French, would be my guess.
Because I was going to say that maybe you don't use C into B for just any job, but maybe just for a few quote unquote simpler jobs, or
right.
or you kind of look at what the language combination is, and as you said, if the languages are closer together, then maybe that makes it easier.
Or for example, and here's a controversial one: if it was a choice of do C into B or take relay, then so for instance, if the relay was in your B. Not actually, but if it was a choice between take C into B or take relay, then it probably makes sense to do C into B. In theory, no one actually knows. The reality is, and this is something that we have discussed on the show before, and I'm sure we'll come back to again, most of our kind of modus operandi and what is I don't know what the plural of that is.
In the interpreting space?
Oh, yeah.
The modi operandi?
Modi operandi sounds okay. It sounds Latin enough. Fake Latin's good enough for me. Most of our way that we work, we're established quite early on, not necessarily on the basis of what we would now call hard scientific evidence. How open we are to reviewing that is a whole other question, and I think we covered that a bit in the research episode. But it could be, and here I'm very careful what I say, but it could be that some of our standard operating practices in interpreting were based on assumptions that turned out not to be true, but we don't know.
Yeah. So before we get in any deeper into interpreting research, can we just wrap this up and say that you do not feel bad/guilty/inferior about not having more passive languages?
I think that's fair to say, yeah. But
that basically boils down to you look at your market, you look at your customers, and if what you have works and you don't have to sleep under a bridge, that's fine.
That's right. Although I do have to say that I have found interpreters who have like 5 or 6 different C languages, some even more, but they're usually very related, right? Like it's usually like Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and whatever, or like a lot of Slavic languages. But it still kind of boggles my mind that all these people speak these languages, not to the level that they would be comfortable interpreting into them, but like you can send them into the country and they would be able to converse with the people, even though it's like 7 different languages. And they might not be super, comfortable doing it, but they could. And that just kind of like blows my mind. That's crazy stuff.
I must admit, when you first said that, I thought you meant the interpreters were related rather than the languages, and I thought there was like this family of interpreters with 10 C languages.
Yeah, it's kind of EU.
Going around the Austrian countryside playing accordions. I have no idea why. The hills are alive with the sound of interpreting.
Sound of interpreting.
Right, but before Alex, before you think you got away scot-free, the question actually continues, because it continues. If we feel bad, guilty, or inferior, or if conversely the institutional interpreters with lots of passive languages ever wish they just were fully bilingual in English or any other major European language and their mother tongue. So, Alex.
That is actually a very good question.
He is fully bilingual. It's annoying.
No, I've thought about this a little bit, and it is true that on average or overall, EU interpreters have more passive languages simply because they need to, because we have to cover so many languages, and we also, we get support for learning new languages and adding new languages. So that's a little bit easier than when you have to do it on your own time and your own dime, basically. So I think that's one factor. And there are colleagues who have several passive languages, and many of them are related. So maybe they have French, Spanish, Italian, and maybe added Romanian a couple of years ago, that kind of thing. But there are also colleagues who have Maltese, Hungarian, and then maybe Spanish and Dutch, and then maybe
Jesus
something
Christ.
else, which is completely crazy and doesn't make any sense to me. But it works. They can certainly hold their own in a conversation, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And when it comes to feeling bad about not being fully bilingual, first of all, I would question if that's even true when you only have, quote unquote, one or two working languages. Are you then fully bilingual? I think that's a good discussion to be had, but maybe in another show.
That's like full hour discussion.
Yeah, exactly. But I think I know where the person is getting it. I think, anyway, what I was trying to say is that even when you have a lot of passive languages, you still will have, maybe it's your first working language, maybe it's your favorite working language. You'll still have one that is kind of closest to your heart and that you're really, really very good at. And maybe you spend all your holidays in that country, that kind of thing. So you'll still be, quote unquote, bilingual and will have one language that is very, that you just master very well. And another thing is that some of the colleagues in the EU institutions work into a B language as well. It's not as common as it is on the private market, but some of us, including myself, we do work into a foreign language and in specific kinds of meetings. So that is maybe just one more thing to bear in mind here.
I actually find it funny, and this is not even part of the question anymore, but it's part of the comment that we received by this anonymous person that asked us this question, by this anonymous listener, because they actually wrote that this topic is very close to their heart because they have a double A and they're attempting to add more languages and they're finding it difficult psychologically and linguistically. And when I read the question, I was thinking, I know for a fact that there are people out there that would kill to be a double A in two languages that were actually in demand in your market. So I think you can really milk that for a lot. And at the same time, I really get where they're coming from, because adding a language is really difficult linguistically and definitely also psychologically. I actually have a friend of mine who is Italian A and then German English B. And she's married to a German. She lives in Germany. And, I was talking to her about this, with the whole Italian thing going on. And just the amount of work that she has to put in to keep all three languages, on par is just mind-boggling. I have no idea how. And that's also why I'm thinking it's really difficult if you're working in the market and if you're having enough work, then where do you find the time to actually put it in to a third language or maybe even a fourth language? And it just boggles my mind. So if you have a double A and it works in your country, I think everything else is kind of like for me, my Italian is kind of like a fun side project that I'm doing. And then I'm just going to see where it goes. But there's no pressure. And I think if you're a double A and two languages that are in demand in your country, you can do that too. Just see where it goes. No pressure.
I think one of the things I would want to say to the person who posed the question, and also to other interpreters, especially young interpreters on their journey, is that we don't have a profession where the criteria are completely set. For better or worse, interpreting is largely unregulated, especially conference interpreting is largely unregulated. Business interpreting is unregulated. And the fact that you can set up your business and decide, okay, within the realms of economic plausibility, you can say, okay, I've got double A, which a lot of people would kill for. I'm going to aim to serve this kind of client, the client for whom those two languages are their thing. Mm-hmm. If other interpreters come up and say, oh, you should really have a third language, you have the right to say to them, actually, my business plan says, no, I don't.
Yeah, that's right. Totally true.
You don't have to, and I wish we would kind of teach people this, that, everything we've ever said about interpreting is guidelines. And I loved someone wrote rules. There's a book called, I think it's like 101 things that every translator should know. And the last one is follow the rules, but break them if you feel you have to. and they said, every rule is context bound, including this one. And I think that's brilliant to be able to say to people, brilliant. Okay, there are standard professional operating procedures, and, we've got to be professional and all this stuff. But within that, if your market is allowing you to have a double A and you're working with clients in a field that you feel passionate about, go with that, and don't let anyone ever tell you that you need to have, Russian at C or Arabic at see or whatever. Just be the best interpreter you can with the stuff that you have.
That's
and
right.
that interpreter will be enough. I mean, so some of us are having to think, about the financial consequences of politics and stuff going on, but we are still business people. We get to make a decision. I don't think Apple ever sit there and go, I really wish that we could do a laptop that looked more like Dell's. Of course they don't,
No one's ever said that.
Yeah, but Microsoft don't sit there and go, I wish we could our designs could look more like Apple. No, they go and do their thing, and the people who want their thing buy it. That's how it works.
Yeah,
that's true.
But maybe to wrap this one up is, I like how you said that interpreting is a profession, not so much of rules, but of guidelines. But I think that makes it difficult for people who come into the profession. Because let's be honest, we really like having rules and things to live by and work by, especially when we start out. Because when you start out, it's kind of difficult to just make stuff up as you go along.
That's very true. Yeah, also just on that notion, I know we want to wrap this up and move on to the next question, but especially in the beginning, don't put as many languages on your business card as you can, because I did that. And that really came around to bite me in the butt one time, because I do have a degree in Spanish, so technically I wasn't even lying, but I didn't speak any Spanish, so technically I was lying. And then, at a job for German English, one of the delegates actually was like, "Oh, I saw you also have Spanish. Like, could you help me with this email?" And I was like,
"Sure."
What do you say? You're sitting right there next to them at the coffee break. There's no excuse. And then he showed me the email, and I literally didn't understand a word of the email.
Oh, no.
So I just had to be like, well, it's a very short coffee break, and I'm gonna have to really go to the bathroom. And I just made up some ridiculous thing. And the next day, I changed my business card and never looked back. So don't just add languages because you're thinking it's going to help you business-wise.
Because that is actually one of the very few hard and fast rules of interpreting is that you don't accept jobs that you're not qualified for.
Well, I was qualified for the job that I was doing, but I was not qualified in any way to look at.
You know what I mean.
Conversely, there's an extra rule which is always have something up your pocket, up your sleeve, which isn't in your business card. So my favourite booth mate, we were at a deep sea fisheries policy job, and one of the people there decided to speak Gaelic. And Laura just pressed the turn mic on button and delivered fluent, perfect English. And I was like,
"Oh, that's awesome!"
Because every meeting has that speaker who's trying to get one over on the interpreters, and there's some kind of surely that I don't think that happens at the European institutions, but on the freelance market you meet them all the time, and it's such a nice feeling when they've tried to get one over on you, and you're just like, score one for us.
And they usually
You're actually just returning the serve.
Yeah, exactly. They usually announce it to, and they're like, "I'm really sorry for the for doing this to the translators, but
you know, ... Or the line that I think should be banned from every conference. I wonder how the interpreters are going to handle this.
Yeah, I know.
Is this on the? Is this on the bingo sheet?
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, I think somebody should do like an interpreting bingo. Let's see who comes up with that.
So the next question is one of my favorites. It's a topic that comes out a lot, and this comes from Veronica from Mexico.
Hi, Veronica.
Hi, Veronica. And she said, "How do you manage to stay in control when the speaker is lecturing at the speed of light?" Alex
is probably thinking of a Spanish speaker, wasn't she?
Probably. Well, first of all, there's a great coping technique that I always use when a speaker is really fast. You switch off your microphone, you take a look at your booth partner, and you take a deep breath.
I thought you were going to say you turn off the mic and you leave the booth and never to be seen again.
Well, that's the second step, because you take a deep breath and then you run for it. But
yeah, exactly.
No. But,
your turn.
Exactly. Oh, my mic doesn't work anymore. Sorry. No, but again, there's different schools of thought to this, and I really like the fact that how are you guys laughing?
It's good. Keep going. Keep going.
This is gonna be a great episode.
Right, okay. Seriously.
I'm gonna fix this in post.
No, don't, because imagine like all of our listeners are listening to this on like their daily commute, and it's really drab, and outside it's raining, and all of a sudden they just start laughing. That would be really fun.
Yeah. Anyway, we're here to serve.
I know. Yeah, but honestly, I think again, there's two schools of thought to this, and one is the kind of like summarize approach, like kind of try to condense what the speaker is saying, and the other one is kind of like what I mostly do, because I have a very, very short décollage. You just kind of stick with it. But the trick with that is I think you can't make it sound rushed, even though it is. You have to make it sound appealing. Otherwise, it's very jarring to the listener. Because I think speed in language isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a bad thing if it sounds uncomfortable. But there is a way to make most things, even if they're very fast, sound good, or at least good enough to the listener. And quite frankly, I just don't have the brain capacity to... my décalage is just not long enough to do the whole summary thing. So I don't even try. I tried a few times, but that just like really throws me off, and it takes so much mental capacity out of the rest of the job to have a really long décalage, and then I usually kind of start freaking out, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm about to lose him, and then that doesn't really help. So I've just stopped doing that. But yeah, I think you can do both. If you can do both, I think it's great. I think there's nothing wrong with the summary element, even though I always do wonder if the speaker speaks really fast. And I mean, the audience, even though they're listening to the interpretation, they're sitting in the room and they
will notice. Yeah,
they notice that the speaker is going super fast, and then they hear somebody going like, "And then, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to point out these figures."
All smooth.
And I'm like, well, there's going to be some sort of a disconnect, but then I wonder if people
that's true.
Care if they feel like they're getting the information that is being conveyed. So I don't know. But yeah.
We should get Brady on the show. She has a fantastic book chapter on that topic. Yeah, I was going to give this one to Alexander Drexel, actually, because my impression from people who work at the European institutions is that speed is a massive factor there. I know certainly I've met a couple of European Parliament interpreters, and their line to me was, if you can't deal with speed, you can't work there. I don't know if it's the same at other parts of the institutions. I still can't get over that they're called institutions. But,
they're called institutions for a reason, Jonathan.
I wasn't going to make that joke. But yeah, so is it, from what I've heard from other interpreters who work with international organizations, it seems to be that speakers being in a rush tends to be their kind of default setting there.
Yeah, well, maybe it's not. Sorry, were you?
No, I was just going to pass over to you.
Maybe it's maybe not the default setting, although that there are some situations where it is the default. So that the classic, really part of institution law, if you will, is the EP plenary meeting, which happens every month. And what they have as part of the plenary is, I think they call it 1 minute speeches, where basically MEPs can stand up and talk for 1 minute about whatever they want to talk about. And usually, of course, you don't get the script before. You may not even know what the topic is going to be. It may be an MEP that you rarely hear, who is trying to, seize the occasion, try to get something into the minutes or into the discussion somehow. So that really, I've never done it myself, thank God, but I've heard a few war stories about it, and apparently it really, really is tough. And you basically sit like that and you try, you try to survive the whole thing. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, which I guess also happens on the private market quite a bit, and which is read out speeches.
Oh yeah.
And
how we love
since most people, yeah, let's pull one out. Since most people don't write for speaking, I mean, these are texts that are usually not written by speechwriters who know what they're doing. These are usually very dense texts with lots of information, lots of data in it, read out at lightning speed, because there's a limitation on speaking time, and you have an allotted slot that you have available, and your speech is actually way too long for the allotted time that you have. So you kind of read it out and try to get it all in. The thing is that very often you do get a manuscript, and you can sort of take a look at it beforehand and, highlight the most important things, and then you can focus on that when you interpret. But I think those would be the sort of the two things that happen quite often. So read out speeches, which are too dense, or which are very dense and hence make it very difficult for the interpreter, and the sort of whole 1 minute speech thing in the parliament.
I mean, I think it's really common to get it on the private market. When you're saying about read out speeches, my nightmare, and every kind of non-governmental international organization seems to have one, and that is the converted Eurocrat doing a read out speech in their third or fourth language. I got one at one association conference, and it was someone who I think had a background in the European institutions, had got a job in this association doing something, and I don't think it was right to say where she was from, but needless to say, it was evident that the speech that she was reading out, she had written, and English was definitely not her first language. I would doubt it was even her second either. And I mean, the rest of the speakers were pretty much fine, but she just kind of shuttled along this speech with international organization law and arcane and jargon, and just went vroom for 20 minutes. And there were, I think, 8 of us on that job, and we were all literally like holding onto our desks trying to just get through this. Yeah. And if that happens at the top of a job, you feel like a loser. Because, you know, you get the chairman's introduction, and let's face it, most interpreters could do the chairman introduction for them, because it's always the same thing. You know, if you're in Scotland, the chairman's going to say, exactly. It's always the same speech at the start of every single conference meeting thing. And then they start giving the people, and my nightmare is converted Eurocrat that's got a job in this organisation, speaking in their 15th language, or they decide to put finance guy who has given everyone 8 pages of accounts to read and wants to go through every figure on every page.
Yeah, they basically turned an Excel spreadsheet into a speech.
Actually, I'm kind of into that though, like the whole super fast finance stuff. I'm like a sucker for punishment on that one.
Let's just say when I'm going into French, if it wasn't for the French word environ, I wouldn't be able to do that stuff. It's like my most used word. I use it even more than je. You know?
No, actually,
but I mean, yeah, that's the thing. So we had a few things there. So not enough speaking time, reading out a written speech that is not properly oralized. I could probably say, and then that it's that you have to speak in a language that is not your strongest language, and maybe you have a manuscript that isn't great, and you're really just trying to get the whole thing behind you.
So
Did we actually have any tips though? Except for taking a deep breath.
So Alex did the summarizing or stay with. My kind of revelation through doing the PhD was asking the simple question in your head when you look at the agenda: what's the speech there for, and who's who's listening? So, for example, in that speech that I did at the association when it was a converted Eurocrat, it was evident that all they wanted out of that speech was something like, you know, what's our current position with regards to certain European laws? They didn't really care about all the detail of the names of like the numbers of the law and whatever, because they understood through keywords what that law was going to be. And it wasn't until she finished, I realized actually no one's fully listening. They're just listening for the law that affects their business being mentioned and what they need to do to not get sued.
Right.
Yeah. And I think a related thing is probably that might help you is when the speaker uses a presentation, which is almost always the case, and all the figures are on the presentation.
Oh my
God,
of course, yes, I love it.
Especially if you're interpreting into French, you know, with those weird numbers, then you just say, you know, look at the slides. The numbers are here.
Where are the numbers in French? Are we going to get into this debate?
No, we're not.
No, we're not.
Nobody ever wants to get into French numbers.
Drei und zwanzig?
That's totally sensible. That makes a lot of sense, and I'm not going to stand for nothing else.
No. And maybe just to pick up on the décalage or ear voice span or whatever we want to call it, because that's a running thing as well now in the podcast. I guess there are probably two. I don't know if there are two schools, but I would probably go with Alex there and probably stay pretty close to the original. What about you, Jonathan?
I'm from the west of Scotland, so fast does not scare me. Slow freaks me out. My biggest problem is, so like, you know, I grew up where if you pronounced your consonants, there was something wrong with you. So I can totally do fast. If you want me to do fast, I can do it. My concern is that when we fall for the just stay with them, you have to be super good to keep your enunciation up, especially into beat.
Yes.
And so this is where I like Alex Gansmeyer's point about they still have to have like a good experience. It still has to be usable for them. So that's the temptation. But I mean, let's face it, if you skip every fourth sentence or whatever, no one's going to notice. There's a really good paper by Jemina Napier on strategic omissions. She's talking about sign language interpreting, but let's be controversial here. There is a place for it. And the fact is that at certain speeds, you just won't get everything. You just have to deal with that and just get on with it and sound confident. My concern is, though, with when I have a slow speaker, there's always a temptation to drop in a filler. And there's nothing worse than when you drop in a filler and it turns out to have been the wrong one.
Yep.
So there are only so many times that you can say, as I was saying previously, before you realize that the speaker isn't recapping on anything they said previously.
They were actually making a completely new point.
Yes.
Yes.
And then you have to kind of add in what they said previously to make forget it. Slow. If someone could teach me how to deal with speakers who go, ladies and gentlemen.
Actually, I think that the biggest challenge with slow speakers for most people, I'm being one right now. No, what I was trying to say is as I was trying to say before, I think the problem with slow speakers is that many interpreters are afraid to be silent for various reasons, I guess. And I think if you can somehow manage to deal with it, and if the speaker is just so slow that you say nothing, I guess that's already first step, a good step.
But to be fair, I do think that most interpreters would sign on to the fact that if you have a slow speaker, you feel like you struggle more than if you have a fast speaker. So I think actually,
agreed. Yeah.
I think most colleagues would prefer a speaker that is too fast than a speaker that is too slow.
Yeah.
Also for the placement of the verbs in the different languages. Like eventually, there's only so much time that you can wait to use a verb, and then fingers crossed it's the right one, and you can somehow make it work. But as you guys were talking, there was another thing where I was thinking sometimes not all approaches work, because I was doing a job let me give you a different example. There was a colleague of mine who was going on to a teleshopping network and interpreting a teleshopping. That wasn't not me, but there the people are obviously like super excited to introduce the latest shampoo or what have you, and they're super excited and they're speaking really fast. So if you have again, it's one of those things where even if you watch it on television, you can still hear the original talking in the background. And if you then have somebody who goes, and this shampoo will make your curls absolutely beautiful and silky, when the other guy goes 100 miles an hour, then I think you're losing the impact. And I think those are my two main takeaways, like make it sound appealing, make it a good experience for the listener, but also don't lose the impact, whichever mode you choose out of the two. Because then obviously, what's the point?
Yeah, and I think we're going to edit all of this down anyway. We.
I'm just going to put in chapter marks, and then you guys can just switch to the next question.
I think we will go to the next question soon. I think the main thing for me if we wrap this up, it's a case of we're not there. The end goal of interpreting is not to get every word perfect. The end goal of interpreting is that the clients can do what they're trying to do with the meeting.
Yeah,
that's right.
Ouch.
But yeah. Didn't somebody say on Twitter recently, but this was a completely different discussion, that interpreting is not there for the interpreters, it's there for the clients?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't agree to the point that was being made at that time, but I think it applies to a lot of different situations across interpreting.
Yeah.
So
that was from Jonathan Reckman from the article about phone interpreting.
Yes.
Yeah, if we do another episode on remote interpreting, we're getting
exactly.
Anyway, get an expert in. So
yeah, let's. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah, let's move on to the next question. Okay. And we when it comes to this show actually going into post, we'll just send like an entire list of edits.
All right.
This is a fun question. It's a little bit flattering, but I'm going to read it anyway. It's from Jana Zida from Slovenia. She had one question. As all of you are busy as bees, interpreting and doing other stuff in family and free time, what kinds? Yes. Do you know what that is? What kinds of magic do you use to agree on recording dates, and how do you find and choose the topics? So this was basically about the process that we use for making this show. And those of you who subscribe to the ITI Bulletin will know about this already, because Alex and I wrote a whole article about that, explaining the entire process. But we can give you a short version, I guess.
That's right.
The very short version, the TLDR, is basically we use technology.
Yep.
So for agreeing dates, we use Doodle, which I think a lot of people use, which is a great tool to
diarize.
To diarize stuff. Exactly.
It's a wonderful tool to send me invites to tell you what time I'm available and for me to forget for about 2 weeks.
And yeah. So the idea is that you avoid all the email back and forth on when would be a good time to meet and talk about this, but you just send out this thing. You pick a few dates from the calendar, and then everybody can just check their availability, and then you pick the date that works best for everyone. So that's it. It's the product's from Switzerland, which is one thing I really like about it. It's doodle.com if you haven't used this before. But I have a feeling many people have used this.
Do you like it for #GDPR? Reason?
I don't know. Yeah, I think it's from Switzerland, so it must be good.
Right.
GDPR.
It's either compliant or it's stuffed in a vault somewhere because it's Swiss.
Yeah. Well, actually, you don't have to collect any data. You can just you can either put in your name or you can just put in a nickname or whatever. That's fine.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is that let's make this the quick question. But if it wasn't for technology, we couldn't do this, because right now what people might not realize is you're going to be listening to the audio. We're actually watching each other on video through Zoom.
Yeah,
that's correct.
So that's the second biggest piece of technology that we use. Zoom. It's similar to Skype, so it's a video conferencing solution. We've tried several things in the past, actually, and Zoom seems to work most reliably. So it allows us to see each other. So that's good to avoid too much over talk and people talking over each other and stuff like that. And we can use the visual cues and so on and so forth. And Zoom also allows us to record in the cloud. So I can get recordings from the other two co-hosts, which I then use for editing. And for editing, I use a piece of software called Reaper, which is a digital audio workstation that many musicians use. And I use Reaper together with it's basically a plugin, getting very nerdy now, but I'll keep it brief. It's called Ultraschall Ultrasound. So that just puts some podcast specific functionality into the Reaper digital audio workstation. So I'll throw the recordings from Zoom in there. I'll edit it down. I'll add our music. And when I have the first draft, I send it out to Alex and Jonathan through Google Drive or something like that. And then they can provide feedback and say, please cut this, please, do this, X, Y, and Z. And then we have a little bit of back and forth over the edits. And then I'll do the final version. And once we have the final version, we upload it to our website, which runs on Fireside. Yeah, Fireside. Yes. Which is a solution to host your podcast, quite simply. So gives you a website, you just upload your audio. Then Alex puts in all the metadata and the show notes, and he makes a nice little image for the episode. Then it goes live. And that's basically it, I think. I mean, in terms of process.
There's a couple of things as well when it comes to topics. We had a conversation 5-6 episodes back about the more podcasts you do, the more ideas for topics you have. Yeah. So it's like over 2 years ago, we had the first episode, and we had no idea how long this would actually last. We still have no idea how long this is going to last. But we started with, I think it was on machine interpreting, which is a topic we've revisited and we should probably revisit again. And
yeah, good idea.
And the thought was that we would only really pick the controversial things because no one was talking about this stuff. And there was a realization that, well, certainly I've realized that almost every topic is controversial to someone. In every episode where I've thought, oh, this one's going to get us in trouble, the feedback's been great. And occasionally when there's been an episode and I've thought, that's tame, that's not going to cause any issues, then the big discussion starts. I have no idea what that is. So we get ideas from topics, from things going on in the interpreting news. We get ideas from topics from listeners, send us things.
Social media.
Media. I think we have like our topic catalog for things we want to cover is probably we've probably got like the next 12 episode topics sitting in Google Drive folders waiting to go. And the thing is that there's nothing to stop us going back to topics again, and things do move on and things change.
That's right.
And also sometimes, so one of the things that I've noticed has triggered a lot of episodes is we see really interesting people and we think, we really need to get that person on. A prime example was Judy Jenner, all three of us knew of, but Yoon Mingus, who was on the same show, the Alexies trusted me that he was a good guy to have on the show, and actually he was a really good guy to have on the show.
He was, yeah.
So we now have, I'll let everyone into a secret, we now have like a discussion thing on Slack, and when we suggest someone, we have this discussion of, are they more a Lang FM person, or are they more a Troublesome Terps person? Like if they're some like serious highfalutin expert without a long deep story, then they're Lang FM. If they're not a nutcase, then one of us.
I think that summarizes it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Although we might have kind of an overlap project coming up.
Yes.
So that's the teaser for this one.
Well, actually, I mean, if we think back, I first met Alexander Drexel. So I met Alexander Gansmar because we were both on the ITI board at the same time. Then he ran away.
Flew away.
No, he went back, actually. He came back.
But I met Alexander Drexel, I think, possibly through Lang FM, because he invited me to be on Lang FM, probably instantly regretted it as soon as the recording started.
No.
And then I think I actually sent him an email and said, do you know Alexander Gansmar? And I think the response back was something like, well, yeah.
Duh.
Everyone knows everyone in the entire thing. But yeah, so I don't see us running out of ideas for the next year. But please do send us topics, because there are issues. I mean, I noticed in this Ask Us Anything this hour that there are topics that I hadn't even thought of that people have sent us, which are amazing.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's true. So you mentioned two things, though. So we use Slack for all the communication around the podcast and other stuff as well. We have one channel in Slack which is called Off Topic, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
If you're coming to the live event, you'll know what we mean.
Yeah, exactly.
If you know what I mean.
And then we use Google Docs and Google Sheets and all the Google collaboration solutions quite a bit.
That's true.
Yes.
Even during the show sometimes.
We also really like the word solutions, and I'm not sure why.
Well, it's what we use in the interpreting space, Jonathan.
Oh, bingo!
That word. Right, let's move. Can we move on?
Let's move on.
Let's move it along.
We've had a question from Katja Stöver. She's a friend of the show, and she sent us a really long question. And it boils down to, given the speed at which we work, given the profession, do we consciously work according to our gut feeling, or do interpreters let themselves be guided by their intuition to guess what the speaker wants to say? What do we think?
So you actually already interpreted a little bit into that, because the question wasn't phrased. So I was reading the question and I immediately went into the booth as well, like you just did, but she doesn't actually spell it out. So I'm guessing, though, she means what we do in the booth if we work with the gut feeling, because she does say that normally, everything must be rational in the free economy. And I do think that if you're talking about outside the booth, you should probably make entrepreneurial decisions on a rational basis as far as possible. But in the booth, it's not just gut feeling, obviously, but I think a lot of it is. I think a lot of how it's just kind of like with the speed thing, right? Like you kind of have to, and this comes with experience, so it's difficult to say this to people just coming into the market, but you kind of have to know yourself and how far you can go without having to wait for the speaker. It obviously helps if you've done the event like 25 times and you know, okay, now this is the guy who's going to ask the troublesome question, and then this is going to be the CFO, and the CFO is always going to be saying this, and like those kinds of patterns do repeat. So in those instances, you're kind of on safer ground, but sometimes you're on shakier ground. And then I think the best bet is to have your intuition say, hang on a second, maybe you want to take a sip of water now and actually weigh what they have to say, because it can go really wrong sometimes. But I do think it's a good mix of your experience and and your intuition.
Well, I think sometimes it's also difficult to differentiate between is it gut feeling, is it instinct, is it experience, is it routine, is it sort of just chunking of things you've done so many times in the past. Maybe we will have to revisit this at some point, because it's going very deep. And I think she was inspired for this question by another podcast she was listening to, which was specifically about women in the workplace, and how, I don't know if that's true or if that's just anecdotal, women might be more, influenced by gut feeling. I think that's kind of where the question came from.
So on an interpreting basis, if I put my researcher hat back on, I am a practicing interpreter.
We need to get you an actual researcher hat at some point.
See, I have to say that I am a practicing interpreter as well as being a researcher. Actually, the two worlds collide all the time. But the answer is, and I was chatting to Killian Sieber, who's arguably the world's leading expert on the cognitive side of interpreting. And if you were to ask him, how much of interpreting is gut feel, how much of it is rational, logical decision making, he'd probably just look at you and go, I don't know. Because
he'd have something cheeky to say.
Of course he'd have something cheeky to say, but it would boil down to I don't know. He would ask you to define what you meant by gut. But I think
for a given definition of gut.
But I think this is the problem, is that interpreting goes so quickly.
Yeah.
Trying to pin down what's going on is really, really hard. Now, I say this semi-jokingly, but my life got a whole lot easier when I stopped assuming that human beings were rational. No, seriously, because, and this again is controversial, but often what we mean by rational is I can predict what they're going to do. And as much as we like to think that there's such a thing as, objective rationality, history and science and psychology tells us that actually that's an illusion anyway. Rationality is defined by what the individual thinks is rational or what society says is rational. So, what is rationality anyway? That's a philosophical discussion. But, if you're interpreting and you just have to say stuff, so Chris Durbin once said to me, the translators are self-critical, interpreters are self-confident. And that's kind of unfair, because I don't know about anyone else. I step out the booth and 9 times out of 10 I go, I wish I could have done better with that, and I'm going to work on this.
Sure.
But there has to be something of, I'm going to dive in and I'm going to do this. And would you call that gut? Would you call that your training kicking in? In my case, would you call that my public speaking training in? My public speaking training kicking in? I don't know.
And by the way, there's just a very good book that I wanted to recommend, which is called Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, who does a lot of research on, mostly in the economic field, but not only, about how people think they're actually very clever, but they're not. That's a good recommendation.
There's an entire discussion that, a couple of hashtags we could do for that. Right. So the answer to that is our gut instinct is probably, but I mean, this, I guess. It is slightly concerning that so much of interpreting we don't have a clue about, if we're honest.
Well, makes it fun, doesn't it?
Unpredictable. Right. Shall we move on to the next question, guys?
Yes. Yep. Let's do that.
All right. So this is a very short question, but I think it's based on a relatively lengthy Twitter discussion that I apparently completely missed out on. So the question is from Tony Rosado at IAPT, at the IAPT conference. And I think you can probably find it somewhere on Twitter as well. I think there was a really lengthy thread.
We'll provide the link.
All right.
Yeah.
And the question is interpreting an industry?
Yeah, so just for some context, as Alex said, this was a presentation given by Tony at the IAPT conference in September, late September. and I think he was talking about how interpreters can deal with what's going on in the industry that we are. And one of his slides was that he said we are not an industry, and I think I retweeted this, and then a whole discussion basically sprang from that.
Because you're an influencer, Alex.
No, that's not. That wasn't the point. I'm just saying that some people basically said, well, is that a question? Is that even an interesting question to ask? And Barry Olson said it's a question of semantics. And, some people maybe like to see themselves as part of an industry and some don't. Then William White commented that barristers have assistants and paralegals preparing their cases, etc. Interpreters don't really gain much from assistants and don't hire them. Former is the industry, so the legal industry, later a profession. So I guess you could come at this from a lot of different angles, but I think my impression was that it just makes some interpreters feel uncomfortable to call it an industry. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because some of us, we see interpreting maybe as a bit of a form of art, or I don't know, or a craft or a trade. I don't know. What's your take? Oh.
No, like I know these
fluffy.
No, yeah, this whole thing like interpreting is an art form, and it's just like get a grip, man. It's a job. Like it's a job. You're not painting the next Mona Lisa. I know there's like an art to interpreting, but this whole thing like we're all artists in a way. Yeah, we are artists because we make it look like we actually know what we're doing. That's an art to itself.
Con artist.
Yeah, con artist. There we go. No, but
okay, that's going
and also the fact that you actually like were to. Did I get that right? That you were saying that if you're in an industry, like lawyers, they have assistants and we don't, and that's a difference. Yeah. I actually have colleagues that have assistants.
Yeah.
So like,
you mean for tax stuff or just in general?
No, just in general. Like whenever I send them an email, like I never get a response from them. I always get a response from their assistant because they have an assistant.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
If I had the cash, I would.
Oh yeah, I would.
I think so. There's a couple of things going on. The sarcastic side of me, which I never let out to play, but this.
Hang on, guys. No. I think this might be controversial. What Jonathan is.
Please don't put the word controversial on those bingo cards for the live show. So the sarcastic side of me says, if we have time to discuss that question, we're obviously not busy enough.
That is a very good point. Jonathan.
So, like, I don't think Bill Gates ever sits around in his pajamas somewhere going, am I in an industry or a profession or a sector? No, he's too busy with his billions under his seat. It's like he doesn't care. Now, on the one hand, I get why this is a discussion because there is a fear and possibly a justifiable fear about what you could call the industrialization of interpreting, which is when you get people start making interpreting call centers or remote interpreting studios with 150 interpreters in one place. And it ends up being like the call center that I worked in for my first paid job. That is industrialized interpreting. That I can see a problem with. There's enough research to show us that's not a good way to do interpreting, even if it has to be done that way in certain circumstances. Fine. I get it.
So that would be the commoditization of interpreting.
Yeah, that'd be the commoditization, assembly line stuff. And if you're going to say industry means assembly line, then I get why that's a problem. On the other hand, if you're just going to say industry is an economic sector where goods or services are produced for a market, for example, the language industry produces goods to do with languages or services to do with languages. The legal industry produces legal services. Then, by dictionary definition, it's an industry. My concern is that if we have this snooty thing that we're not an industry because we're too good to have that view of life, then we are really insulting a big chunk of our own client base. And if
that is an excellent point, Jonathan.
And if we're going to say we're not an industry because we're artists, well, let's reel this back a bit. If you're a freelancer, first and foremost, you're a business. And if you ain't a business first and foremost, get out because you're obviously charging low rates that no one else would want to match. You're a business first, You're a business which produces or offers interpreting services to a market. Now, come on a minute. You can call it what you like, but this is the economic reality of interpreting. If you're a freelancer, you're a business offering interpreting services and ancillary services to a market.
Yeah.
What you call that is immaterial. How you behave in that role is far more important than the sticker you put on yourself.
Yeah. Just one thought on the what you said about the industrialization or commoditization of interpreting. Of course, that kind of leads many people to think about, I guess, automation. What do you call it? Automation.
Automation.
To think about the automation of interpreting, hence the machines taking over. So maybe that's what makes some people uncomfortable with the term industry as well. And then another thought was that I think one of the comments was that while interpreting, one of the comments was that industry also kind of implies that there are several different professions with different sort of levels of qualification in there, and maybe not different qualifications, but we certainly have different professions in the language industry. So there's translation and copy editing, and I don't know, a lot of different things. So just a few random thoughts on that.
So I'm going to jump in with one more thing, and I want to see how Alex Gansmeyer responds to this. So ITI, for a long while, but certainly clearly while Sarah Bauer-Mason was chair, has been very clear that we are a sectoral body, which means that we're not the Institute of Translators and Interpreters, we're the Institute of Translation and Interpreting.
Yes. Yeah.
So as a sectoral body, and this, you can say sector and people don't complain as much, we cover the interests of this sector. Now, that's an interesting thing, because then if you start saying things like, I'm an interpreter, as an interpreter, I work in the language services sector, industry, whatever you want to call it, then actually you're saying that my sister or brother professions are translation, copy editing, and so on. And actually we have common cause together on a whole lot of things. And then suddenly you can be more comfortable. So one of the services I'm beginning to offer clients is, if I'm interpreting at a meeting and their conference is going to be in 6 languages, well, I should know enough translators to say, how about we translate your website and your agenda into the same languages that are going to be interpreted? And since I'm the project lead, then all the translations get fed back to the interpreters who, hey presto, get their term lists for free out of the job. Now that's, sector level thinking, where it's not just about us as interpreters anymore, it's we're in the language services, insert word here, and we can work together because we actually have more in common than we have that tell us apart.
Yeah, and I think that I seem to remember reading some, call it business advice at some point, that when somebody asks you what you do for a living, maybe you don't say I'm a translator or I'm an interpreter, but you try to phrase it as a verb. So you say, I help people communicate, just on a very boring level, but you try to sort of frame it as something that you do and something that helps people or provides solutions or whatever, that kind of thing. So maybe that's
I help companies
that moves us away from the whole industry term if people aren't comfortable with it.
I help companies win international business. There you go.
Something like that. Yeah.
So Alex,
awfully vague.
but I mean, Alex Gansmeyer,
but I like it.
What's your take on, that actually interpreters and translators and the other language services people could do a lot better working together than we can at the moment, when everything in a lot of places is quite separated?
I think the reality of the job is that a lot of the times we do work together. Like in that example that you just mentioned, I think that was a perfect example, because that's exactly how it should be. But I also think that a reality of the fact is that sometimes, so in the language space, let's say, because we like that word so much, let's say interpreting stands in the middle, and to the left of it is translation, and then to the left of translation is copy editing, and to the left of that is whatever. But then to the right of interpreting is something else then is to the right of, oh no, hang on, that doesn't work because then, of course, on the right of translation. Okay, so I got totally lost on that metaphor, but basically, like, we have touch points to all of these professions within the language space, but we also have touch points with other professions that have nothing whatsoever to do with those languages, with those other language jobs, right? So, for example, I could also say that if you are an organizing interpreter a lot, like one of the sister professions, you could argue, is event organizing, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Obviously, that if you focus on that, or if you kind of tilt into that direction a little bit, that takes us further away from the translation side of things. So I think it really depends on who you are as an entrepreneur. And I think, as you've clearly mentioned, we are all entrepreneurs. Like, we are businesses. And quite frankly, I really couldn't care less if we are in the language industry, in the language business, in the interpreting industry. I usually say the language industry because that's just kind of all-encompassing, and that's exactly what I think it is, and it describes what you've mentioned. There's translation, there's copywriting or whatever, and then there's interpreting. So I don't think...
But Alex, aren't you actually a solopreneur or a lingopreneur or something like that?
Well, wasn't Lingopreneur the drummer for the Beatles? That's not
whatever, but I'm calling dibs on this new buzzword.
Lingopreneur, hashtag Lingopreneur. I like it.
But then I take Alex Kansmeyer's point about, to the other side of us, we think about our sister professions being translators, interpreters, but I don't know if you realise, but recently I was interviewed for the MICE blog, which is meetings, incentives, convention, something, events. And the lady there who interviewed me, one of her favourite quotes that she actually put in full in the article was, think of your consultant interpreter just like a specialist event manager.
That's
because in a way,
right.
Yeah, in a way, that's what we are. And so actually, interpreters sit in this weird, I refuse to use the word space, this weird position where we're in the language industry, but we're in the language services thing. I don't know what word to use now, but we're also in the events thing, because you can't get away from the fact that to interpret, at least in person, is to help in the management and the running of an event.
Right, but that's not everybody. And I think that's a very, very important thing to mention, because I would put myself into that exact box that you just mentioned. Well, it's not actually a box because we're thinking outside the box, but I'm in that thing you just mentioned.
Zone.
Yeah,
you mean in that space?
That space.
In the zone?
Yeah, I think you could probably call it a space.
That interstices.
I'm putting myself into those lingopreneurial shoes. But but I know for a fact that there's a lot of colleagues who don't do that. I know for a fact that there's a lot of colleagues that I know personally as well that don't organize anything. They are just being booked, and then they do their job, and they do it very well. And that's why they have continuous jobs, but they do not help in the running of an event, because they just show up, they do their job, they don't consult the client, they just get booked and they do the job. And that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think like many things, we're all on a spectrum, and I would just leave it at that.
Well, my argument is that by being an interpreter, you are assisting in the running of an event the same way as the caterer is, the same way as the sound guy is, the same.
That's right.
And it's why I'm becoming more and more keen on the idea of thinking of interpreting as something that an organization is doing. Actually, my newest phrase, which is I've now written as my research interest, is interpreting as organizational performance. Now that sounds funny, but basically it is.
That sounds good.
Interpreting as an organization doing something with an event for a purpose. And one day, dibs on it already, one day I'm going to write a really fancy academic book called Interpreting as Organizational Performance, and I've dibbed it already. But
heard it here first, people.
The more that we see interpreting as organizations doing something with an event, I think the better we're able to interpret is once I understand, even with recent ones, once I understand what this was about. I had a job recently, and the entire function of my interpreting was to make it a nice experience for the rugby players who were there. And they are kind
that
of
is the most Scottish thing you've ever said.
Yeah. Yeah, and like
Probably.
so no one actually was sitting down taking notes on the captain's after dinner speech. Of course they weren't. They just wanted a nice time. And I'm not saying it would have been okay for me to just make stuff up, because I didn't make anything up. But you realise that, the pressures of that event are entirely different to the pressures of, I had a job a couple of years ago where I was in a sales negotiation worth several £1 million. That's an entirely different setup.
Yeah. Well, you would hope so, right? I mean, yeah, but lots of different things going on in the interpreting thing.
Right. So we had.
So should we move on to the last very substantial question?
Because this is going to take a while, right? I mean,
but, do you know we were on that question so long? My Google Drive actually had to reload the page.
but I think there's this. Yeah, we should probably just move on. But that was a really interesting question. I think it was a very short question, but you could take that in so many different directions, and I think we just touched upon a few of them.
We could probably revisit this at some point.
And I know fine well my quote about looking down on those at clients is going to end up in either end of the show somewhere.
Yeah, probably going to be very controversial, Jonathan. Do you think?
You wait until London. I'm going to buy you embarrassing baseball caps.
Okay, we'll move on to the last very substantial. It was more like a comment actually, but there's good stuff in there that we can discuss.
Yeah.
This comes from Ahmed Tauman, and he left a very nice comment on our blog post about this episode. And he's an interpreter on the Arabic market, if I understood correctly, and describes sort of some of the difficulties that he's encountering. He says that the market that he works in is not really professional, it's immature. Many clients just looking at the cheapest or the lowest bid. There aren't really any standards when it comes to recruiting interpreters, to training, hiring interpreters. Although he says that interpreting is very important for the entire region. And what we've done here is we tried to extract a few sort of questions or topics from his comment. And the first one was that, how could we as a network of professional interpreters educate clients on this difference being the difference between someone who knows what they're doing and someone who does not know what they're doing?
And they're just being cheap. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
Well, I can't say much on this. It's more of a freelancer question. I think.
But the thing is, I mean, so my point is that, we do educate clients on a daily basis, right? Because most people have no idea who we are and what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we can do it.
So you translate simultaneously, huh?
Synchronously, Alex. Synchronously. And to be fair, Alex, I think that also applies probably to a lesser extent to the European Union, but you also educate people a lot, as to how they should speak. And I mean, nobody probably ever listens, just like in our market, but I think we educate them on a daily basis. And like, why shouldn't we? Why should they know what we're doing? So I think just take it kind of one client at a time. Try if they contact you, they obviously want something from you, right? Like they want your service. So you should probably take that time and explain a little bit. First, you should probably see if the client already has experience. If they're saying, okay, we're going to have an event where we require consecutive interpretation for 3 15-minute intervals with coffee breaks in between, you could probably have like a feeling that, okay, they haven't done this for the first time. This is their first time at the rodeo, if you know what I mean. But
we do.
But
that went downhill.
But if you kind of can gauge from the way that they interact with you and the kind of the information that they give or don't give that they haven't done this a lot, then you can kind of jump in there and start edifying the client. And I hate this word because there's no proper way to translate the word in German, and that's why I keep using it in English, where it's a totally appropriate word to use.
I come at this completely the opposite way, and it's come as a result of doing business networking and seeing the interest at trade shows. I'm not sure I like the term educating clients.
It's a bad term.
So a couple of things going on here. One, we have this superiority complex coming in. And I've become very aware recently that I probably know more about interpreting than my clients. They know far more about what they want out of their meeting than I do.
Agreed.
And so rather than coming in with, here's a whole lot of information, here's how you have to do it, My take is, well, let's find out first what it is they're trying to do. And then from what we understand from what they're trying to do, then discuss with them business to business the best way for them to do it. And it may not necessarily mean, for example, the worst thing that I've seen people do is come in with kind of giant boots and say, you have to run this simultaneously. It's, well, do they have to? Is simultaneous interpreting the best interpreting for that setup? For example, if it's a kind of, discussion forum and it's kind of like a round table thing, then you could argue, so long as it's managed well, that you could do kind of dialogue style interpreting there, and the clients might prefer it because they might prefer to have the interpreter there with them. They might prefer to see the interpreter. When Donald Trump and President Putin were meeting, Donald Trump and the President Kim were meeting from North Korea, I don't think anyone went up to them and said, you know what, guys, you need a simultaneous interpreting booth here. You need 2 interpreters in the booth. You didn't. No one did that. And I know, very few of us work for presidents day in and day out, but can we not have a bit of respect for our clients and start with asking questions before we, smack them with standards? Let's say, okay, so I now have a standard brief. It's available on my website. I will send a link. It's, there's a blank version that interpreters can use. Translate it into your language, send it to the client. And clients love it that you're asking them all these questions because you then look professional. Then you get the brief back, and from the brief you can tell very quickly what is the best way to do this that will achieve the result the client want, and then you go with that. And when you explain it in those terms, it's a whole lot easier to have the conversation.
This just reminded me of a tweet, and I found it right now. So there was an AIC event during the weekend in Rome, and Barry Olson was speaking there, and he had a slide which I think was taken from one of these audience interaction tools, Slido maybe, where you sort of ask questions at the end of an event. And the question here was, working with interpreters is, and then people were supposed to fill in words.
Oh, Jesus.
And wait for it. The 3 biggest words that come up are challenging, frustrating, difficult, and then it goes on: stressful, hard, interesting.
Interesting is good.
So, yeah,
unless they're
just as an additional data point, as it were.
So, there was a wonderful article written by a Munich-based interpreter who wrote in the ITI Bulletin an article about not being a diva.
Who could that be? Can I start with, I totally understand the. Technically in the UK, it's kind of an immature market. I totally understand the impulse to push for standards and push for qualifications. It's totally fine. Yeah, great. But you can't force the clients to do something. You actually need to get their buy-in. Yeah,
and so actually the greatest way to bring a standard in is for the clients that you work with to realize the last time we did it your way, it went so much better. Can we have you back? In the meantime, it's horribly frustrating that people undercut and do things they shouldn't. Absolutely, I agree with it. Even happens in the UK.
What?
Totally,
I'm sorry.
I'm totally fine with people getting annoyed at that. I get it. But if our standards are correct, then eventually the client should say we don't want to do it that way. If there's some reason for our standards, then the clients themselves should have the impulse to say, that was garbage, how do we fix that? And there's no greater client than one who came to you and said, the last time we had an interpreter, it was garbage, can you show me how to fix it? That's a dream client.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, our standards are just to make us comfortable, the clients are never going to accept them anyway, so let's forget all about them.
Yeah, I think that kind of segues into the next question as well, which was about pricing. We probably can give a very brief answer to this one. Is there a way to standardize pricing on a national level? I've personally worked on
No.
Bear with me. I've personally worked on developing a pricing scheme which outlines all criteria for selecting and compensating interpreters. I think that makes sense, but when it comes to price fixing, I'm going to call it that way. I think it's a straight no, especially from you and me, Alex, because this was tried in Germany a couple of times and it never worked, and it's basically an absolute no now.
Yeah, and it was tried, previously, and then the what was it? The European Court of Justice actually got involved. Some antitrust authorities, because some mysterious international interpreting body tried to impose price. Well, more or less fixed price points, and that just didn't work. So, yeah, on a national level, you can't do that. But I actually forgot to mention on the previous point, but this links directly into this point, because he was saying that he's already worked on developing his own pricing scheme with outlines and criteria and everything, and that's fantastic. And if you want to educate the client, or Jonathan, or what was the word they used? You didn't say educate. You said
work with them.
Work with them, and kind of bring them on the same page. You can do the same thing with colleagues of yours. It doesn't have to be an official interpreting association. I know plenty of interpreters who have gotten together on, online and then formed some sort of a network. It doesn't even have to be on a contractual basis. It doesn't have to be an official company. You guys can just have sort of one website, and each of you covers a different region, and then you guys can fix your own pricing amongst each others. That's fine. Just don't do it on the website and say, this is like the official pricing point. But you guys are all entrepreneurs, so you can set your own standards for yourselves. And then if you have a bunch of colleagues that do this, maybe it'll catch on.
I think also the people tend to quote Adam Smith and say, professionals never get together but to fix prices. And so I'm wary of, I understand the impulse towards set price levels, but I'm wary of it because, again, it's interpreting is for the clients. Now, we don't, some of our regulations and stuff and conditions are there for good reason. So you shouldn't be doing simultaneous interpreting for 2 hours straight off by yourself.
On your own.
Totally, yeah, absolutely. There's good reason for that. But, there's no... If you have colleagues who are doing it for 50% cheaper, then there's 2 things you can do. You can either try to push them off the market, or you can say, well, what can I do what can I do to justify that extra price? So there's far more scope to your own business. You can do whatever pricing model you like, so long as the clients will pay for it.
Right, but there's a point to be made for that, but also you should be really careful, because if you do play around with the pricing models too much, you might be rubbing a lot of people the wrong way, and you don't want to get on all of your colleagues' bad sides, because imagine you go out onto the commission job and then the deal goes south, and then you've basically ended up working a whole day for free, and then somebody else didn't get the job who would have been paid. So there are points to be made for both sides. So just do be careful, do be considerate about all these options. But just get together with a few colleagues who are like-minded, and you guys can set your own standards. I mean, I'm sure that while it is an immature market, as Ahmed was saying, and there's not a lot of standardization going on, I'm sure that a lot of colleagues still work similarly, and there are some people that have the same standards and have the same mindset. And you can get together with those people and kind of represent yourselves. And then eventually the client will see, hey, it's not just this one guy or these 2 people, it's actually 5, 10 people, and not just in one city, it's actually in 3, 5, 10 cities. Maybe there's something to it as to how they actually behave and comport themselves on a business level. So I think that's something that you can do.
I think that's actually something that he touched on in his last remark, right? Because this basically, he said that there's currently no active association or government entity that overlooks the entire translation interpreting industry. Apparently, the Ministry of Justice does some accreditation, but it's only a formal test, and it's not really all that useful, and there's no monitoring. So that basically, I think that sounds a bit like a job description for a professional association.
Right. Yeah.
Although you put some figures in here. Alex,
I did. I put some figures down about, because the only 2 bodies that I could think of that would be acting internationally is AIC and FEET. And AIC has about 100 members in the different Arabic regions. So in the Middle East, it has 41 members. In the GCC states, it has 14 members, and then 87 members in the League of Arab States. So there are some people there that I'm sure you could get in touch with. Some of them I'm sure he has gotten in touch with, but especially if they're in AIC, I think they already have sort of a mindset about certain standard conditions that have to be met in terms of working conditions and qualifications, not necessarily pricing, but that's not the only thing that matters necessarily. So I'm sure you can reach out to a lot of those people and get in touch with them and then do their own thing on the market.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about FEED though, because they are more they're an umbrella association of professional associations.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's
as for associations, you have to separate out a regulator from an association. Okay, associations are not there necessarily to tell people what to do. In fact, a lot of associations would resist becoming a regulator. Regulators are the people who set the standards and say, you lose your license if you don't do this. And the problem with regulators is they're necessarily conservative. Yeah. They have to be. Associations, a good association should be creative and should be thinking not just about standardization and stuff. They can do that if they want, although normally we would leave that to regulators. But associations are more about...
It's more like certification, maybe.
Well, more about raising the profile, more about kind of defining what does it mean to be an interpreter here, what does it mean to be a translator, pushing for the interests of that sector. And I think the problem is when you conflate the work of an association with the work of a regulator, you always end up in conflict of interest. You always end up in antitrust stuff because people start thinking that their association should be a union, which again is a completely different thing as well.
Yeah, but that is actually
let's not
surprisingly controversial, and I actually think that is very controversial because I do think that, at least to some extent, that associations do take on the role of a regulator, and they should, I think, because as you've mentioned, they're basically the closest thing that we have to trade unions, and they basically try to define what good working conditions are for us in order for us to deliver the best service to the client. So I do think there's a case to be made for associations regulating. I'm not saying they should be the regulator, but I'm saying they should.
I would say associations should regulate their members. So the difference is a regulator regulates the entire
industry
sector. So for example, a regulator would do something like in an ideal world, say there was a regulator for legal interpreting. The regulator is not just regulating the interpreters, but saying this is how legal interpreting will be done. Whereas an association normally says this is how our members will behave. It's a subtle distinction.
So it's
code of ethics or code of conduct.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So now some associations, I know certainly SFT in France, see themselves as more of a union, and you can go down that route. Personally, I find that if you go too far down the union route, then it can be difficult to do both the union work and the external PR, kind of positive PR.
Yeah, absolutely.
Union work and lobbying is perfect and is perfectly compatible. Union work and the positive PR, raising the profile thing, is harder because you're then going to the very people that you were telling off 5 minutes ago and saying, and you should love us.
Yeah.
Really? That's kind of difficult. But to actually go back to the question, go back to, work as a team together, but definitely I would say think first about through the eyes of your clients and through the eyes of your potential clients. What are the working practices that are going to allow you to deliver the best service for them for the events they're putting on? And what kind of team do you need to bring together to be able to do that? So for example, we might think about, let's standardize working hours, let's standardize booth size, let's standardize breaks. Okay. But how about compiling a list of approved sound equipment suppliers? It's great for clients because then they know straight away that the sound equipment guys are going to be good, and it's good for you because obviously you'd approve them because they're giving you kit that you can work with.
Right.
That's actually a thing already in Germany, right,
Germany,
Alex? VKD has a list of...
Yeah, we have a list like that. But I actually also want to go back to what he was saying in his question about the Ministry of Justice and how they do like some sort of accreditation test. And he was saying that they are merely formal. And Alex, I want to lobby this question your way because the EU does an accreditation test, but I don't think that's just a formal test, right?
Well, I'm not quite sure what he meant by formal. So did he mean that it's too easy and everybody can pass?
The way that I understood it is basically they just check your diplomas or your background, and it's just kind of like a formality thing. I don't know if that's correct, but that's kind of how I would understand it.
Well,
So in the Europe, hang on, sorry, Jonathan, but in European Union, it's different, right? Because they actually check your skills and how you present yourself and
you take an actual test,
right?
And depending, oh God, I'm not quite up to speed on what the accreditation test is like, on whether you need to have a diploma or whether it's enough to show that you have some experience. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, you have to go through the formal step, and then you do the actual exam, and you need to be able to show that you know how to interpret.
Right, and they also fine tune the test probably, and they see what's working, what's not working, and it's not the same test that it was like 10 years ago.
No, and you get a different speaker every time,
right.
And there's different speeches, of course. I mean, the test overall doesn't change that much. I mean, there's going to be a consecutive speech and a simultaneous speech.
No, of course. But so because I was thinking, if he knows this is about Ahmed's very specific situation, but I was thinking if he, already has some context in the Ministry of Justice, maybe he can get himself onto that testing board and kind of like tweak it in a little bit of a way that he thinks would be more appropriate instead of just formal testing, and kind of improve it in that way, improve it for everyone, for himself, because then obviously the colleagues would have a higher level of professionalism, whatever that may mean, and also improve it for the Ministry of Justice because they would get better people. So if you can get an in on that, maybe that could be an angle to work.
I think also, so there's different views on testing. So for example, there are tests in the UK, and I have to be very careful because I don't want to put my foot in it, but there is a test exam thing done in the UK, and it only tests your interpreting, from what I can tell, or certainly it tests your interpreting and the knowledge of the field that you'll be interpreting in, which is fine. But the problem is if you have a setup which is just an exam, as in you just have to know how to interpret. But, that's a whole other topic. But so if that's what he's meaning by formal, like it's just a test, and if you pass that test, if you interpret well enough in the test, you're an interpreter, I get the concern. And then that becomes a job of the profession to socialize people. And that process is by no means refined. We don't quite know how to do it properly yet. But, maybe one place to start, and we've given you a lot of places to start, Ahmed, but maybe one place to start is to look at who's offering any sort of training or events for interpreters. And if no one is, you do it. And,
yes, absolutely. Advice,
so if no one's offering, I don't know, a Facebook group for interpreters in your country, start one.
Start there,
If no one's offering a 1-day course, there are people that we know well who quite happily come in and do a course on what does it mean to be an interpreter. Negotiation for interpreters, we know someone who does a brilliant course on negotiation for interpreters. And, it costs a bit the first time out. But when you get one training event and you get 6 people there, those 6 people have then been socialized into the values of interpreting. Then they're going to go out into the people they know, and they're going to socialize other people.
Spread the word.
Yeah. And so you start with something small, and if you think, okay, it's too much to go to the Ministry of Justice, it's too much to do this or that, well, okay, start a Facebook group and say, okay, guys, how about we go for dinner somewhere and we just chat amongst interpreters over dinner?
It's actually a surprisingly good way to socialize and spread the word about stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just going for drinks or for dinner or whatever.
Yeah, and like, I went temping bowling with some local interpreters, and I'm now thinking that I should go temping bowling with more interpreters. Also, they laughed at me because, if the little lane side things aren't up, I can't score. But, you find it very quickly who's serious. You find out very quickly who's interested in growing. And, even influencers had to start somewhere. And just try, maybe, just maybe as interpreters, we try to do the standardization before we do the socialization. And maybe that's the wrong way around. Maybe we do the socialization first. We build the values first, and from those values come the standards. Yeah. Maybe if we did it that way around, we would actually get client buy-in because they're buying into something more than an ISO standard booth. They're buying into a set of values that they can say, we believe in that too.
So maybe Ahmed really is in a very good situation because he gets the chance to set standards and not in a literal way, but shape the profession
Yeah.
in a way that is maybe different or exciting or whatever.
He's going to
Excellent.
be the influencer in his country.
Absolutely.
That's actually a really cool position to be in.
Put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah. Excellent.
Right.
Well, I hope he finds that useful. We certainly gave him he gave us a lot of food for thought, and maybe we gave him some in return, and a few pointers to where he can start. Yeah. So I don't know about you two, but this felt almost like several episodes in one.
Yes.
There was so much interesting stuff.
We
going
can.
on here.
I think we might end up doing Ask Us Anything Part 1, Ask Us Anything Part 2. Nearly 2 hours.
We'll see. Oh, as I said, we'll put chapter markers in, and then you can just jump to the next question if you want to.
Yeah.
Although you would miss out on a lot of good stuff.
That
so
is
there you
very
go.
right.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks to both of you. This was another really, really fun episode. And if I recall correctly, the last one before the live event. And I must say, I'm getting slightly nervous, but also excited about the live event. So I think we have everything in place. We have a program. We have a special guest. We have all the gear in place. And I hope I can get it safely to the other side of the channel.
Well, it does look rather suspicious.
Yeah, no, it'll be fine. So I'm really looking forward to that. Any closing remarks from you two, Alex and Jonathan?
Guys, let us know what you thought of our answers, because I'm actually really looking forward to getting some sort of reactions to what we've been rambling on for almost 2 hours. Yeah. And if you have any more questions,
if you want us to do this again,
exactly. Yeah,
send
if
more
you have
questions.
any more questions, do send them our way, and we'll be happy to do another hour episode.
I also want to say that occasionally we do highlights episodes. I don't know if we'll manage to do one next year. We have no clue. But occasionally we do kind of highlights of the past year and so on. And the last time we did it, we picked our highlights and we went through every episode we'd done until that point. Yeah. I would love to see like a listener's choice episode where you tell us what you thought was good. And,
that would be cool.
And then we do like a kind of your choice episode, because actually we really would love more comments and more feedback. Criticisms as well as positives, but of course, couch the criticisms in nice comments. I really love your show. There's just this one tiny thing you should do. Please stop.
And then you go on a half-hour rant.
Yeah, please stop, Jonathan, making jokes.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good idea. So if you want to do that,
for me not making jokes.
No, I mean, people should just hit us up on social media and provide positive and negative feedback. We're open to all of that. So you can find us on Twitter @TroubleTurps and on Facebook as well, facebook.com/TroubleTurps. All of the former episodes and everything else, basically anything and everything is on the website, troubleturps.com. And the next time you hear from us, it'll be a live, it'll be a live episode if you're in London, and we're really looking forward to seeing you there. Or you can, of course, listen to the recording of the live episode later on. So that's it for tonight, and we'll say bye-bye.
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 I'm about to join Instagram, so I really need to get in with the joke crowd.
Oh my God.
But how do you put dad jokes up on Instagram?
Oh, trust me, I have great meme pages that I can send you with
Put dad jokes?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Are you two already on Instagram?
Oh, please, I live on Instagram. Like, my whole life is on Instagram. What are you talking?
I was there for about a year, and then I left. I just didn't see it. It's not for me.
I'm going to see if I can use it to get some clients. But anyway.
Oh, well, that's not what I use it for at all.
Actually, Alex G uses it to lose clients.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much.
Your entire Instagram feed is just pictures of Beyonce and Britney.
Yeah.
And food and travel location. That's pretty much it, yeah.
I could do like inspirational dad quotes. That would be cool.
I think
that would get clients.
There's no such thing as an inspirational dad quote.
I was wondering what that was going to be, but yeah, sounds
I'm
like
a dad. I'm allowed to say that, Jonathan.
Are you saying dads aren't inspirational?
No.
Hey.
They're coping. That's what they are.